as someone who feasted on various forms of Stalker, be it the original trilogy or mods,
Move to next level.
the idea of Stalker 2 being a thing was always a worry. The history of Stalker 2's various attempts at existence would always make the actual release, at the very least, a curiosity. Either way, I was there for its release, with the full price purchase of the standard edition. Side note, selling single player content, even if it's a weapon or early access to a single player game, is just stupid, and it's part of Microsoft's attempt to upsell GamePass users. But this video is not a review of Stalker 2, it's more of a request to allow me to give you my thoughts on what Stalker 2 is and the state of the game. Stalker 2 is fine, but is fine enough? Not really. Aside from performance issues, the game itself boils down to a fairly long-winded experience that doesn't really justify how much the player is simply walking around into large areas not really filled with much at all, aside from the starting zones. And that's before we start talking about the A-Life system, or at least Stalker 2's version of the A-Life system. Side note, the A-Life system was in the original Stalker games and would create this quasi-living world type feel. By that, factions would fight each other, mutants would hunt and act accordingly, and you'd see interactions between NPCs that made the world feel alive. Stalker 2's A-Life system, well, it's there, kind of, maybe, not really. Enemies spawning in packs randomly, mutants being nothing more than bullet sponges thrown into the mix for, hey, remember these? These were in Stalker. The economy makes no sense, with everything being too expensive and everything you're selling being too cheap. If you're not running out of ammo, your gun's breaking. And the story's decent. Anyway, it's a 6, 7 out of 10 for those who require numbers. And that's kind of the general thought of Stalker 2. Stalker 2 launched with an array of issues, but regardless of that, a lot of reviews seem to overlook it, whether they were excited for the next big thing, or they just didn't know any better. And look, these things happen. Games release with issues or undercooked aspects. But Stalker 2's post-life is, well, it frankly reads like an early access game heading towards 1.0. The roadmap for game updates in 2025 includes things like new weapon, critical A-Life fixes, mutant loot, and more additional A-Life fixes. While it is good to see a studio fixing up their game and adding content, but given the state Stalker 2 is released in, it's hard for me to think, why wasn't this just delayed? Stalker 2 was clearly not in a position for release, with one of the franchise's key aspects not being up to snuff in the form of A-Life. But with my near 90 odd hours spent in the game, and nearly everything explored and conquered, surely that means the game's release was good enough. I've already asked and answered this earlier in the video, yet the question keeps arising in my head. Can I truly complain about a game I played so much of? Was there enjoyment had? Intrigue? Satisfaction? Am I in the wrong? Well, I did mention playing Stalker mods earlier, and that's exactly the issue. Perhaps I could overlook the early access state of Stalker 2, the bumps, the lumps, the exclusions, but in a world where Gamma, Anomaly, and Call of Chernobyl... Side note, there are too many top-notch Stalker mods to list, please forgive me for missing some of them. Exist? It's hard to accept Stalker 2 as anything but fine. Firmly in the shadows of the children the franchise has spawned, both in terms of fan-made content and commercially released content, Stalker 2 felt like a dishonest full release that should have been listed as early access. But I suppose that doesn't matter if you can get the game for free on GamePass, right? And this leaves Stalker 2 in a strange position, feeling like a developed early access game, but still not at the level that it should be. While it does do some things right and certainly feels like a Stalker game in some respects, it also feels like it's not really there, almost like the first draft. The A-Life system is woefully underprepared, the mutants just don't feel right, and the overabundance of bloodsuckers has turned the franchise icon into a bit of an annoying meme. While initially completing the game, I felt some level of enjoyment and satisfaction. Upon reflection, I think it's time for me to admit that Stalker 2 was underwhelming. And maybe, just maybe, it's time for us to look at the game overall and say, it wasn't ready. and is a glorified early access release under a full price tag. But hey, what's good for Cyberpunk, I guess is good for the rest of the industry.